Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Members, we have quorum. I'd like to now call the 6 p.m. meeting of Budget Subcommittee for Scarborough and North York Civic Center consultations to order. I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is a traditional territory of many nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm joined here by my Budget Committee sub-members, Councillor Shelley Carroll and Councillor Jennifer McKelvey. I'm Councillor Brad Bradford. It's great to have everyone here tonight. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. At this point in time, as promised, we will recess the 6 p.m. meeting until we complete the 3 p.m. meeting. Members, the 3 p.m. meeting of Budget Subcommittee for Scarborough and North York Civic Center consultations has now resumed. We will complete the speakers list. I believe we have 9 to go, and receive the item and then resume the evening session. So with all that taken care of, I'd like to invite Bruce Lynn down, followed by Lydia Labate and Michael Rain. Is Bruce here? Hi, Bruce. Thanks for joining us tonight. You're going to have 5 minutes, and put you on the clock and turn it over to you.
Thank you. I want to appreciate you're taking time to hear my deputation, and just want to say how much, this is really the first time I've sat through this kind of process, and I appreciate this this kind of consultative process and giving us all a chance to speak. So, my deputation is it may be a little different than some of the others. I'm here to speak for a group who never gets to speak at one of these, and that was those who are not yet born. I would like to invite actually everyone in the room to participate in a little exercise, maybe a bit of, you might call it a thought experiment. So I'm just going to invite you all to take a moment. If you need to, close your eyes, take a breath, whatever feels comfortable for you. Settle your mind. And call into your awareness a person from the year 2120. I'm going to invite you to consider calling into mind a young person, a person of possibly like in their 20s or thereabouts, just at that age when they're beginning to come into an awareness of what life presents them, the kind of problems that life presents them, the kind of opportunities that life presents them, and are making those kind of choices that we all make at that age and begin to make at that age. Is everyone with me? You got someone in mind? It doesn't need to be a specific person. I mean, we don't know who this person is yet, right? But I want to remind everyone that that person is a real person. They're not yet born, but they will be here. Just as we were not born 100 years ago, when members of the Toronto community were sitting and debating the budget 100 years ago, and thinking about what kind of city we wanted to create together. And I would like you, if you can keep that person in your mind, if you can ask yourself, and I'd like you to just, you're facing them. They're facing you. You're looking at each other's face. You're looking into each other's eyes. You're recognizing the humanity of one another. They know that you're their ancestor and that they never were able to know you, and you know that they're your descendant and that you do not yet know them. And we just ask you to take a moment and check in with yourself in that situation and ask yourself this question: what are my greatest hopes for this person sitting in front of me? Go ahead and ask yourself that question. See what answers come up for you. Does anyone want to share a response? For me, I'll say that, what comes up for me is my hope is that they're alive. Because I'm aware that in my heart, I'm not sure what the future will be 100 years from now. And that troubles me. And that leads me to my next question is, what are your greatest fears? What are my greatest fears for this person? I'm realizing I'm almost out of time here, so I don't want to take more than my 5 minutes. But I want to say that I'm hoping that if as we're deliberating the budget, we recognize that these small steps that we take in terms of how we spend our money and where we allocate our resources for this coming year, if those choices can be made with an awareness of what impact those may have in building a city, building a society that will realize our hopes for that person 100 years from now, I would really appreciate that, and I think that could make a big difference to the kind of choices we make. I would also like to remind us that we often discount the future. We often discount the future in these type of deliberations, and for good reason, because there are so many pressing needs right now. But I urge us not to discount the future in the way that we have done in the past. That's my deputation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Let's see if there's any questions. We do have a question for you from Councillor McKelvey.
Yes.
Hi, thank you. Thursday, 6 o'clock, if you want to join us in yoga class, because you'd be great at the end for Shavasana. But my question is, if you're familiar with what the Toronto Zoo has right now and their exhibit on Lumina about looking 100 years into the future and what that could be like if we did everything right. So I have to phrase things as a question. So I will ask you if you are aware of that, and recommend that maybe you check that out, because I think it's very in line with what you're saying, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm not aware of that, but I certainly will look into that. That sounds interesting. Thank you.
Namaste.
And a question from Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, again, we have to do this question and answer thing, but it's ironic that we just went through this exercise. It's not something council's been through, but it's ironic that you happened upon 3 councillors who actually do. I think I can speak for my colleagues sitting here who actually do, because of our sort of sensibilities, resilience, planning for the long range. You pick the 3 councillors who actually do think that way. But it's out of 25, and up until a short time ago, out of 44. Looking at things that way, and actually setting a sort of, what's your frame of reference going to be? City of Toronto Council has not got together in a room and done this, anything like it, since 2007. I think maybe we ought to do this as a group of 25 sometime in the near future.
Absolutely. I think, it's the kind of thing you can do for yourself daily, just to remind yourself to ground each of your actions, each of your footsteps, every choice you make in care for the impact that it may have. And we can't know what the impact will be, but there's some things that we do know that we're putting off that we should be working on, or that we're doing right now that definitely will have negative impacts for the future. So
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just very quickly, I really appreciate that generational reflection. As one of the younger members of council, I often think about these investments that we need to make, whether it's transit, housing, infrastructure, social services, through that sort of generational long-term lens. Do you engage in these sort of exercises or reflections with different members of the community? Is that something that you've gone out and done before?
You know, it's something that I'm coming into. The awareness, this particular awareness has been growing on me for some time, but it crystallized a couple of months ago when I attended what's called Work That Reconnects circle in Guelph, and we did an activity where we sat. We played those roles and sat. I was a person of the present facing person of the future, and it brought me into an awareness that I've had for some time of the work that activists have done in the past, like the abolitionist who fought, who worked for 50 years to see the abolition of slavery, and could never know how the impact of those actions would keep rolling out, and couldn't even know when they started that it would happen. And I thought, I'm in that position now in relationship to this person in front of me. The things that I choose to do right now will impact them, and it's up to me to have that same kind of faith and awareness of what I need to do, and ground myself in that same kind of awareness. So going forward, I will be working with a group of people to bring these kind of reflections into the community, yes.
Well, keep us posted. It's very interesting because, like in the budget context, we're looking at our 2020 budget, right? So there's a very finite, like 1 year lens, and that's largely a product of the municipal framework in which we look at. Then we have longer, like 10-year capital plans for some of the bigger pieces. But there's definitely an element of the generational lens, and yet we set targets around 2050, things like that, and all governments do. But inherently, the political cycle doesn't last that long. And so it's challenging, I think, for a lot of elected officials to kind of take that longer term lens. So very much grateful for the deputation. Thank you for coming out. It gives us lots to think about.
Thank you.
Right.
As I put this group together, and as I work with this group, would there be an openness to bringing like a circle of this type to City Council or to and maybe doing some of that kind of work? Well, we'll start with those who are open to it, okay? Thank you.
Very good. Thanks for the deputation, Bruce. Okay, that was very interesting. Lydia Labate, followed by Michael Rain and Toreen Clark. Is Lydia here? Lydia? Okay. Michael Rain? Is Michael here? Toreen Clark? Am I getting that right? Toreen? Jay Scott.
She already spoke.
Did she speak
She
already?
spoke this afternoon. She's on the list twice.
Oh.
No, there's.
Okay. Okay. So Jay Scott one more time. There could be two. They are spelt differently on this list here. Sean Mahar, who is here. Thanks for joining us tonight, Sean. You know the drill.
I'm over here.
Do you need to hook up IT or anything?
No, apparently
You got the overhead.
hook it up here, so you just have to do that.
Okay, very good. You have 5 minutes. I'll turn the microphone over to you.
So I'm not sure how visible that is, or if there's a way to zoom.
It's good for me.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. This is a budget that's occurring at a time in the life of the city that's really quite significant. The city has adopted several different, very important long-term strategies. Oh, terrific, thank you. That address fundamental issues in how our city operates. The recently adopted Housing TO plan is a long-term $24 billion plan to address the city's housing crisis that calls on the city to spend about $8 billion in investments at the city level. TTC just adopted its 5-year plan laying out strategies to put our transit system back on track that calls for $33 billion in investments over 10 years, including $660 million that we talked about today, and immediate investments in badly needed new streetcars and buses. The city's begun to address some of those challenges with the mayor and council adopting the new city building levy that adds millions to the city budget and grows annually. Those are changes that are not just important, but they're urgent. We've seen at the TTC ridership begin to slip down from its historic highs. as people run into the most difficult challenge with transit. It's bad if people think transit's going to take them a long time. It's worse if they don't know how long it's going to take them. So service reliability is a key issue, and maintaining that reliability is critical, and we're struggling a little bit with that, and that's having an impact on ridership. To do that, our 5-year plan says very clearly we need to get 60 new streetcars. We need to get them quickly, but unfortunately, up to this point, they have not been budgeted, and that's largely not because staff and the commissioners don't know we need them, but we haven't been able to identify the money and set that aside. The same is true with the buses. And in fact, the buses are incredibly critical because over the next 2 years, we're scheduling more maintenance on the subway. We're scheduling substantial maintenance on 3 of our major streetcar lines, Bathurst, Queen, and King, which is going to divert a lot of buses. And if we're not buying buses to replace those, that means that inner suburban councillors are going to see their constituents waiting much, much longer to get on transit. All of that speaks to a lot of challenges that we need to address by investing in the things that make our city work. The graph I just put up is a graph that shows how we've been managing to pay for things in the city over the last little while. The yellow line there shows the growth in how much we've asked transit riders to pay to make the system work. And it's grown by about 40% over the last 10 years, about 2.5 times the rate of inflation. Transit riders now pay about $290 million more every year than they paid 10 years ago to help run our transit system. That's a substantial investment that we've asked for from transit riders, and they have paid it. The line that's orange that goes through the middle and maps the blue line pretty closely is what we've asked homeowners to pay. The blue line is the rate of inflation, and homeowners are paying now just about at the rate of inflation over the last 10 years with the new city building levy. They'll tick just a little bit over that, but they've mapped pretty closely to the rate of inflation. And so with those folks paying their share, the question has got to occur to people, how come we're so stuck? How come we don't have the $660 million we desperately need for those streetcars, as Dominic was saying, to prevent them from closing the line and making us pay a lot more for cars on a line that you have to start again and retrain people for? And the answer really is that bottom line, the gray line. That gray line along the bottom is what we ask commercial property owners to pay in terms of their taxes. Over the last 10 years, that's risen about 7%, or a little under half the rate of inflation. There's a lot of reasons for that. There is some provincial legislation and regulation. There's some policy decisions that the city made. But the bottom line is that's about a $250 million gap in how much money we have to spend on the things that make our city work, because we haven't been asking commercial property owners to pay as much as we've asked everybody else to pay. And if we do want to be able to enable the city to meet its needs, we do have to ask everybody to pay their fair share. Right now, there are legislative impediments to raising just the commercial property tax rates to catch up to where everybody else is in the city, but there are other tools that we have available to us. The City of Toronto Act gives council tools to be able to tax commercial properties in other ways, and in particular, the commercial parking levy is available to the City of Toronto. It's a tax that is on businesses, and in particular on businesses like big malls and big banks and big box stores that have big amounts of parking around them. And mostly where this kind of levy has been applied in other jurisdictions, small parking lots are exempted, and so it tends to be those larger property owners that pay. And according to the city's own 2016 KPMG study, it raises somewhere between about $150 and $500 million a year. So right about the middle of that is the gap between where commercial property taxpayers are and where they would be if we'd asked them to pay according to the rate of inflation like we've asked everybody else. So what we're suggesting is that we take a look at making sure that we make the investments that we need, the streetcars and the buses and the housing that we need to make our city work, that those capital investments can be supported by a commercial parking levy, because the city building levy isn't quite enough to cover that, and that would have a third benefit, which is it would relieve the 9% of our operating budget that we spend on debt. We spend about $300 million a year on capital from current and $500 million a year on debt for service, and that would give us a lot of room on our operating budget to do a lot of things like climate change that also really matter. Thanks.
Thanks very much for the deputation. Any questions from committee? Councillor Carroll.
I know you work with multiple organizations. The challenge with the parking levy is, I think, I don't think a lot of people understand who would pay it, where it comes from, and what it could generate. Are organizations doing that work in the community so that residents will understand is worth and begin to encourage counselors to look at it?
Yeah, this is a conversation that's been happening in the not-for-profit sector over the last several months as we've been coming up towards the budget and identifying different ways to achieve this. And you can see in some of the reports that have been coming out, people talking about some short-term fixes that are immediate, because a commercial parking levy takes a little while to implement, and making sure that people understand this is not like doubling the rate for on-street parking. It's actually a property tax. If you own a parking lot, like if you own a commercial building or if you own a residential building, a tax is applied to that parking lot, and you as the property owner pay that property tax on that parking lot. So it's not about adding a sales tax to the parking fees that you pay, or raising the rates at the Green P lots. It's about asking the York Dale Mall and asking the big bank towers with their big parking lots to chip in their fair share on the property tax.
Yeah, Yorkdale Mall, for instance, has such a high-tech parking lot now that people are going there just because they like the way the parking lot is laid out. So in a way, it is their earner.
Yep.
So what we're suggesting is levying on that.
Yeah, and you know, it's also not like those parking lots have no impact. If you levy a commercial parking levy and apply that to transit, you'll be encouraging people to, instead of parking in that parking lot and walking across the parking lot to the Yorkdale Mall, taking the subway to the Yorkdale subway station and walking across the same parking lot to the Yorkdale Mall, and doing something good for the environment in the process. And it discourages the creation of big parking lots that have a really negative and expensive wet weather runoff impact on our sewer system, one that we're barely sustaining right now.
Right. So the one other biggie, and we've talked about this before, but I'm wondering again if the organization is talking to the communities so that they know, is the thing that we have to keep talking to the province about, but we need the residents talking to the province about, which is a sales tax. We are now the only city in the world with a population of 3 million that doesn't have some form of sales tax. And that one is basically cover that share of the transit operating that we want, leaving, so poverty reduction strategy paid for, done. Transform TO paid for, done. Library open hours, done. Dozen libraries open till midnight with printers available every night of the week, done. All in the span of the 3 years it would take to fully implement it. But does the community realize that we really need a groundswell from them? Are the agencies that you work with, that SBT works with, Scarborough Can, Etobicoke, the Montgomery House people, are they out there painting that picture?
Yeah, and then that's exactly the network that you're describing is the network that's been having that conversation. If you talk to Beth Wilson, who wrote the SPT report on investment in the city, what she'll tell you is that includes their short-term objectives, but they recognize that there are lots of medium-term objectives that can be achieved through a parking levy and long-term objectives that can be achieved through a sales tax. And the parking levy is a power we have right now that takes a little while to implement. The sales tax is a power we don't have yet that takes a little while to implement. And so that sort of staged process of getting to real financial sustainability is what the Social Planning Council has been advocating and what a lot of people in the not-for-profit sector are talking to their communities about trying to achieve.
Very good. Any other questions? Okay, thanks very much, Sean. Appreciate the deputation. Up next, we have William Pham, followed by Betty Muir and Lynn Adamson. So William, you will have 5 minutes and then an opportunity for us to ask questions. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Right, thank you. So thank you for your time, Budget Committee. My name is William Pham. I'm 15 years old, and I'm the transit lead of the Toronto Youth Cabinet. Like many of my peers, I am a part of the around 50% of youth who rely on the TTC for daily commutes to school, work, and extracurriculars. The TTC allows for youth to traverse the city, all at the price of $2.20, whilst reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. The TTC is a lifeline for all Torontonians, whether you live in Etobicoke or Scarborough or here in North York. It serves as a circulatory system of our city. Like many of you, I want Toronto to be a world-class city. But how can Toronto be a world-class city if we don't have properly funded public transit? Cities across the world, from Seoul to Tokyo, London to Paris, Singapore to Beijing have systems that are efficient, clean, and properly funded. If Toronto is a world-class city, then Torontonians deserve a world-class public transportation system. Today, I come with one simple ask, and that is to properly fund the TTC. For as long as I can remember, signal delays on Line 1 have been the norm. Overcrowding at Bloor-Yonge has been the norm. And entering a sardine-filled train at Finch has been the norm. I am privileged to live in a part of the city, North York, that has access to a subway and bus routes. But many of my peers wait in the cold at below zero temperatures, waiting for a bus in Scarborough that may never come. The TTC is in a state of disrepair, a state in which many compare our stations to public washrooms, in a state that requires emergency action. Many of us only think that when the TTC truly falls apart is when City Council will react. We shouldn't be reactive, we should be proactive. The TTC is currently missing over $26 billion in funding to ensure buses can still run and streetcars can still move. If we don't act now, our system will fall apart, and it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. The fact that over 2/3 of the TTC's budget is funded on fares alone is both unsustainable and shocking. Fares, especially for youth, continue to rise, that double the growth of inflation. And city councilors don't seem to worry that many low-income youth may not be able to afford a commute anymore. As our elected officials, it is up to you to create new revenue sources, whether that be congestion pricing or a parking levy, so we can ensure the TTC can be used by your grandchildren and my future grandchildren. I also challenge all city councilors and members of this committee who do not take transit to work to go 1 week commuting via the TTC to understand the issues of our system and the issues Torontonians face every single day. Understanding the issues that our system has helps us create a world-class transit system for a world-class city. As the youngest person in this room, and on behalf of all youth who take transit every single day, please save our transit system before it's too late. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for the deputation, William. Do you have any questions? Okay, very good. Thanks for coming down and sharing your thoughts tonight. Thank you. Okay, up next we have Betty Muir. Is Betty here? Hi, Betty.
Hi.
Come on up. Thanks for being here with us tonight.
I'm coming here with Lynn Adams. We're going,
Sure,
hopefully we can do this together.
you absolutely can. So you'll each have 5 minutes, 10 minutes aggregate total. With that, I'll turn it over to you and you can start your deputation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
There. All right, Lynn. Lynn.
Okay, we're here on behalf of Climate Fast, a group of climate-concerned citizens based in Toronto. We need to act on climate fast. We began in 2012 focusing on federal climate policy till 2015, and in 2015 we became involved in the consultations that led to creation of the Transform TO Climate Action Program. And we are very pleased to see the budget increase in new and enhanced to support the excellent work of the Transform TO program. We appreciate the support of City Council for this work and the climate emergency declaration that Council passed in October 2019.
However, overall, the funding for climate action does not match the urgency and the action required. It's not our fault. We live in the safest place on earth. And who doesn't want to come and live in a safe place? Toronto's a great city, but there are a lot of things that you need to deal with whether you like it or not. And and I'm going to just run through this quickly. You probably know it already, but I'll do it because that's who I am. So far, the global temperatures have risen on an average of over 1 degree. when I say 1 degree, if your temperature goes up a couple of degrees, you worry. You've got a temperature and you might be sick. It was the same with the Earth, right? And we've already seen extreme changes, of course, all over the world. We're hearing everywhere drought, flooding, fires, ice storms. The bushfires in Australia show us how scary the situation is, and we've had our own fires here, right? And fortunately, we will probably never experience that. And Ontario's fire season is well coming, but just hopefully it'll never be the way it is in Australia. Changes in ocean currents and the jet stream are affecting the climate too. We get the polar vortex, and that's probably what's causing this very deep freeze, right? And we can look forward to very, very hot summer, and then we'll have a load on the electrical grid. If the warming continues, we can get algae blooms, and that'll make the lakes toxic. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where that happens. It's not pretty. Globally, we need to keep temperatures from rising at least by 1.5 degrees or a maximum of 2 degrees. However, we are currently headed for an unlivable temperature maybe of 4 to 5 degrees by 2100. Okay, you know all that. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, has said that to keep the livable climate to livable to 2100, we must cut emissions 7.6% annually. This is crucial. This is a crucial decade. This is the crucial decade for a turnaround, and we're looking to you guys to do this.
Okay. Yes, and you see on the chart there that the orange line is where we're headed, and the blue line or purple line is where we need to go. And we can only get there with big cuts. So how is the City of Toronto doing? The Toronto profile by the Atmospheric Fund shows that emissions are only decreasing gradually. So from 14.9 megatons in 2015 to 14 megatons in 2017. That's 3% per year over those 2 years, if my calculations are correct. And while buildings are the largest contributor to emissions overall, over 50%, transportation is next at 38%. And we must note that international travel, food, and consumption, all the stuff that we buy and what it takes to get it to us, are excluded from these calculations. So this is a partial figure. If we want to lower emissions significantly, we must massively accelerate building retrofit program, and we must completely change our approach to transportation planning. And we must shift massively from fossil burning cars to transit, walking, and cycling. There are many steps the city can take to do this, and these are outlined by the Toronto Environmental Alliance in their presentation, and we support all of these. We also support the recommendations by the Atmospheric Fund in its response to the city's climate emergency declaration. Those are really excellent documents, so I hope you'll look at them, and they're referenced there.
Okay.
Can I just have one more comment?
Oh, of course.
Just for comparison, these figures are what we've, the global agreements starting before the Kyoto Accord, the yellow one's the Kyoto Accord. We had the Earth Summit in '92, all these different international agreements. What we've agreed to do is the dotted lines. What we've done are the solid lines. And the city can only do what we can do in the city, but this is just to illustrate that we have to actually cut. We have to cut dramatically. Thank you.
As the deputation time is so short, we'll just do three examples. The housing retrofits is one. At the current rate, it'll take about 1,000 years to retrofit all the buildings in the city. We need to do it in 30 years, if not 20 years, or even sooner, to match the urgency of achieving a zero carbon future. Ramping this program up needs to be a priority for the city and will create amazing job benefits for youth and underserved communities. Consideration needs to be given to the marketing of this program and providing staff support and financial incentives to encourage participation. Number two, of course, and it's been covered quite well, is transportation. While spending 44% of the capital budget up for transportation for the Gardner, we're not able to find $61+ million to fund the city's bike lanes program. Why not? And let's accelerate the express bus plan. And currently, roads are free while transit riders pay 75% of the cost of providing transit. If we want to shift riders to transit, we must shift the financial picture so it costs more to drive and less to use transit. And transit service must be improved as this will attract increasing ridership.
One of TO's goals is to achieve a shift to active transportation for 75% of trips under 5 kilometers. To do so, we need a walkable city, complete streets. We wish to highlight the example of the rebuilding of North Yonge Street. This will be coming before Infrastructure and Environment Committee in the next few months. We urge you to make this an example of support for Vision Zero and active transportation by building bike lanes and wider sidewalks and reducing the allocation of space on the road for cars. If we want to see change for the future, much reduced emissions, we need to see that change reflected in our planning. We urge you to put a climate lens on all council decisions. We urge you to increase funding for community grants for education and action at the neighborhood level, and we urge you to think big in terms of the changes needed to truly achieve a livable city for the future. For all those who are young now, this truly matters. It matters to the rest of the world, as those who are emitting the least in the global south are experiencing the worst impacts. We can reduce the numbers of climate refugees by doing our part to keep temperature rise to a minimum and global emissions down. Let us learn from Indigenous wisdom to think 7 generations ahead. Let us act on this positive vision together. And these are the youth, the Fridays for Future youth at Queen's Park, telling us to take action on climate. That's my youngest grandson. So cute. And that's upside down, but think about our future. So thank you very much, councillors, for listening to us this evening.
Well, thanks very much, Betty. Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
Any questions from the committee? I see Councillor McKelvey and Carroll. We'll start with Councillor McKelvey.
Hi, are you aware that we have a big report coming to us in fall about the climate emergency?
I thought there's one in the spring of the 2021 and 2023 Transform TO program. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
and then the update, so they'll be having recommendations on moving towards net zero. So I just want to
Yes.
encourage you to come back next year. I think that there's 18 new positions that are being put in this year. A lot of that is about developing the plan, and then we'll be needing the advocacy to put that plan into action next year. And so I'm hopeful that, I have to phrase it as a question, will you be able to come back next year?
We will definitely come back, and I just wanted to say about the 48 positions, because it'll be 30 now currently and 18 dedicated to Transform TO. There were 35,000 staff in the city. That's 1/7 of 1% of the staff of the city for the greatest emergency we faced, and for a 10-year timeline that requires 7.6% emissions reduction every year. It's fantastic that we're doing steps. We just want it, 10 times more, right? 10 times more would be great. So we will come back for sure.
And then in terms of having dedicated department versus your other comment was about embedding a climate lens. Is it also make sense, I have to put these things into question, for us to distribute staff amongst other departments, for example, because that way we are using it as a lens.
Absolutely.
And embedded into everyday decision making. So you do see that it's not just about that one department, but it's also about spreading it around through the different departments.
There need to be liaisons, I would say, between Transport TO and all the other departments, because, the one time I did show up to hear the financial presentation about our financial options for the future, the revenue options and all that, the person presenting it was a very high up person in the organization, chief accounting officer or something like big high person. And the whole program was very formal and official. There was not one single mention that anything was going to change because of climate. Transform TO wasn't mentioned. Nothing was mentioned. This is a couple years ago, so I got to be, maybe it wouldn't happen now. But yeah, chief financial officer or something. Anyways, I just thought, how can we not bring it into every area? So yes, there need to be people planted in every department. We'd support that.
And there is a new, I have to again phrase him as a question, but there is a new chief financial officer who she's very committed to applying this climate lens and resilience lens. And so did you know that we put forward a resilience motion that was saying to embed resilience into our budget process, and that she's in the process of looking at what that could be like for next year.
That's fantastic news. Thank you.
So we need you again.
We will.
Will you come back next year?
Absolutely.
Thank
We're
you.
coming back. Thank you. We're in this for the long haul, right? We're in this for the transition for the kids. Thank you.
I think we have a couple questions from Councillor Carroll.
Well, just a quick question, Lynn.
Yeah.
How old is that youngest grandchild?
1 year old, same birthday as mine, December 23rd, just turned one.
So we really don't need to think 7 generations ahead. When in your chart where we hit the wall in 2050, he's only 31
No,
years
I
old.
am concerned about when he's 10 years old, to tell you the truth, because that's what you hear as ecological collapse is happening in 2030. If we don't act fast, so their childhood will never even be the same. I think about that every time I see them, and it's a big
The point I was
worry.
trying to make is similar. What I was saying is where it seems like a long way away in 2050, but you just showed us someone who's already alive, and he'll only be 31 in 2050.
That is exactly right. Thank you.
Only be 31. And we all know how fast if we look back from the age we are now, you and I, getting from 0 to 30 seemed to be 5 minutes of our life.
60.
And we're almost there. Yeah.
If I just add 65% of the wildlife is gone that was there when we were born.
We're right now talking about transit lines that are going to take till 2050 to complete. We actually are talking about now.
Yeah, that's now. And ravine strategy is so important for wildlife and all that. There's so much more to say, but glad that we had the chance to say this much, and thank you.
Betty Lynn, thanks very much for joining us tonight and debuting. Thank you. Okay, so with that concludes the 3 p.m. session. So I'd like to move that the Budget Subcommittee for Scarborough and North York Civic Center consultations receive for information the public presentations and communications submitted by members of the public. All in favor? Carried. Excellent. So the 3 p.m. meeting is now adjourned. On to the evening. We will resume the 6 o'clock meeting now. So members, the 6 p.m. meeting is now resumed, and we will start with the first speaker on the list. So I have here Sarah Buchanan, followed by Jean-Francois Obregon and Victoria Jute. Sarah? Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Hi,
You have
thanks.
5 minutes. Podium's yours.
Great. Hi, everyone, and I'm excited to be the first speaker at the 6 p.m. meeting. So yeah, I'll be following hot on the heels of Lynn and Betty's presentation, also to talk a little bit about climate change and the climate emergency. First of all, I want to recognize how great and proud I felt as a Torontonian when Council did pass climate emergency declaration. So I want to thank you for doing that. And I also want to thank you for adding in provisions into that motion that actually meant something in terms of how to accelerate the City of Toronto's actions on climate change, adding in commitments to come back with a plan for financing mechanisms in order to actually have the funds to address the scale of this problem. And I want to thank you for putting in, noting the high priority emission reduction areas like building retrofits and transportation as well in there. So taking a look at the budget for 2020, I did see some items in there to accelerate those high priority areas. I get the sense that you're probably not the councillors that I need to talk about how we need to do even more in those high priority areas. I get the sense that you probably want to do that and know that. So if I could, obviously I'd love to see, for example, all transit become free in order to pull people out of their gas powered cars, et cetera, et cetera. But to do that, of course, we need money, we need funding, we need revenue tools. So I'd love to talk a little bit about what kind of tools would give us the power to scale up action in Toronto in order to really tackle the climate challenge. And as you know, for example, the current pace of building retrofits, I think Lynn mentioned it in her presentation, that it would take us 1,000 years at our current pace to hit the targets in Transform TO. That's at our current pace. We need to do it in a lot less than that, in 30 years. So how do we scale up? Knowing that the easy part of the plan is kind of over with. We now have a provincial government that isn't really helping, isn't really doing anything, and sadly is moving backwards on their climate action plan. And the city's gonna need to step up even more than they have already stepped up in order to keep that pace of action and scale it up. So, as I mentioned, in the climate emergency motion, you also committed to exploring financing mechanisms to adequately finance and encourage climate actions and adaptation for the 2021 budget cycle. I would love to see that happen in the 2020 budget cycle. I want to see that happen sooner, and I want to see the city commit to real tools to help this plan kind of grow up and move out on its own with its own funding. And it's kind of like a teenager moving out into their own apartment. And to see a plan that needs to be so big be able to sustain itself. So I think you've heard a few ideas for some revenue tools to be able to do that. We've heard a lot of talk about a potential parking levy. Sean mentioned that KPMG report, which said that I think it was somewhere between 100 and 500 million a year in annual revenues could come from a parking levy. We've also got potential road tolls and other essentially polluter pay mechanisms where we can tax the problem and use it to fund the solutions, and that would really help Transform TO and a lot of other actions that aren't even in Transform TO that are in a whole bunch of budgets scattered across the city. It would help them also to be funded and to scale up to address this problem. And to give you a little sense of the scale of funding here, the province cut, I think it was 50 some million dollars to the city of Toronto when cap and trade was cut. That was for 10 big projects to do things like retrofit buildings. And even that parking levy could fund about 10 times what the province gave the city of Toronto and then clawed back. And I want to thank you also for doing 8 out of 10 of those things anyway that the province scaled back on. However, I want to help you find the funding to do that. So that's why I will be back here when there are reports or motions, and I'll keep fighting for it, and I hope that you will too.
Perfect timing. Thanks
Nailed
very
it.
much, Sarah. Nailed it. Questions from Councillor Carroll?
Really, it was just a comment. I just wanted to say hello, long time no see, Sarah.
Good to see you too.
Sarah was a second floor employee for many years working on this file. You brought up at the very last minute the loss of the $2 billion in cap and trade. A lot of it would have gone to municipalities to do the work they need to do. Sometimes when provinces do those sorts of cuts, we, over the next few years, find ways to keep the work going with city funds. Should we try and fill those gaps and just keep moving at the pace we started out at?
I would say to move even faster, but yes, I mean a lot of those projects that were canceled already were planned out. The designs were on the table, and that funding, essentially made those programs lose money that was already sunk into it. There were sunk costs. So yes, please move forward. And again, I sound like a broken record here, but revenue tools would help those programs move forward, and many more of them as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for coming down tonight. Appreciate the deputation, Sarah. Up next, we have Jean-Francois Abregon, followed by Victoria Jewett and Alim Nathu. Jean-Francois, you'll have 5 minutes, and you can start your deputation when you're ready.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I represent a group called A Voice for Transit. We're a group of students and recent grads from the Ryerson University, and our focus is on delays and overcrowding on the subway, as well as GO Transit within the 416. So I want to acknowledge the good work that's been done on the budget notes for the TTC document. I want to highlight some opportunities and maybe revenue tools that can help fund some of the ideas that we're presenting. So we've done some surveys of the public, and one of the things that people keep asking for are balances to show up on Presto fare gates. York Region Transit does this currently. Perhaps it can be integrated into the preventive maintenance that happens on the Presto fare gates that is a part of the TTC right now. Something else that we have is Wi-Fi on the transit network. There are times when people are stuck before Eglinton going southbound from Finch and there's a delay and you can't let your employer know that you're going to be late. So that would be an idea. If it cannot be funded with public funds, perhaps a procurement process to get the big carriers to do it would be a priority. Something else would be better transit equity for the inner suburbs. So currently I don't see anything on bus priority lanes or the bus rapid transit lines that have been proposed for Eglinton East, Jane, Dufferin, Steeles West, and Finch East. And I would say that perhaps that can be funded using development charges along those routes. If not, you may use a green bond. I know the City of Toronto has already issued 2 green bonds. You have a green bond framework in place that can be utilized for this. If it's going to cost $50 million, as the TTC has stated, then I can give the example of Mexico City that is using or has used the proceeds of a $50 million green bond to fund a 22-kilometer electrified BRT line that's under construction right now. What else? I would prioritize construction of the second platform on Bloor-Yonge Station. Again, there are, you may use development charges for this. There are condominiums that are being proposed in that area that do advertise, or I'm sure would advertise proximity to the subway as a selling feature. So that could be one way of doing it. And if that is not prioritized, then I would recommend, we would recommend having funding for training of TTC employees so that when there are closures, they have preparation for dealing with that issue. I think back to what happened in January 2019 when there was that massive closure one morning, almost closure one morning, but there was a lot of disruption on the TTC system. What else? There's a need for 60 streetcars that's been talked about. When the funding does come for that, assuming it does come, here are some ideas for how to negotiate that contract, or maybe how that system, that those streetcars are designed. So one of the pitfalls of the streetcar right now is that it's kind of awkward to grab onto handrails that aren't there. So I would negotiate better design of that. So include that feature. Something else that right now you have seats that sort of face each other. And while it's nice to look at the waterfront, I would recommend eliminating part of those seats for the new streetcars simply because it's kind of awkward right now. People want to pack on, and you have these empty pockets and you have people still waiting. People don't want to move into those areas standing up. So to get more people on and reduce crowding on future streetcars, I would recommend creating more space for standing on the future streetcars that you're going to order. It will also help Bombardier with their sales of future streetcars on that, to that matter. What else do we have? That's it, actually. So the reason I care about this, one of the reasons I care about this is because I remember the cutbacks to transit about 10 years ago, and I remember being affected by that. And frankly, I see the good work happening, and I want more of this to happen in Toronto. So anyway, these are our recommendations, and I hope you take them into consideration. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks, Jean-Francois. Do we have any questions from committee? Do you have any of those comments or recommendations written down that you could submit and share with us with clerks?
I have it written by hand. I can type it up and give it in a more legible fashion.
I was taking some notes here. I think my colleagues were as well, but if you wanted to submit that as correspondence, I think we'd be grateful. It was a lot of good ideas there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for your deputation. Thanks for being here. Okay, up next we have Victoria Jute, followed by Aleem Nathu and Ibrahim Kahind. Victoria, thanks for joining us tonight. You will have 5 minutes, and I'll turn the podium over to you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Victoria. I reside in Ward 25, and I volunteer in Ward 6. In Ward 25, I am involved in 2 resident-led community groups called the Malvern Food Security Work Group and 42 Voices. And in Ward 6, we have created the Bathurst Finch Community Action Network. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. I would like to talk about climate and the 2020 city budget for my deputation. The proposed 2020 tax-supported budget comes 3 months after City Council declared a climate emergency and committed to take strong action to prevent climate breakdown. The city has announced $5.9 million in new or enhanced climate-related funding in the 2020 budget. The proposed budget includes some positive actions to address the climate emergency. However, there are several important actions that address the climate emergency that are not included in the budget, including number one, expansion of energy retrofits. This is a high priority area, both in terms in single family and multi-residential building retrofits. Number two, transit improvements and fare reductions. Number three, protected bike lanes. There is no clear commitment to complete the Bloor-Danforth bike lane in 2020, and 61.6 million of this city bike plan is unfunded. Number four, climate resilience, increase capital spending for climate resilience in 2020 and over the next 10 years, including the ravine strategy. Number five, climate lens, fund and implement a process to assess and report to the public on climate impacts of major city decisions, including financial decisions. And number six, establishment of a dedicated climate fund. There is no mention of the city's commitment to develop a dedicated climate action fund in the budget, or any mention of potential revenue sources, for example, parking levy or congestion charge, which are supported by the Transform TO reference panel to help fund climate action. There's something that I want to mention regarding community engagement, that there are community-led groups that are already working on food, transit, waste, and energy at the local level. And the city can leverage these groups to help with the recommendations in Transform TO and also provide resources to these groups and the initiatives they are already working on, so that we're building on the work that is already being done in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation, and not necessarily starting from scratch. With regards to the two neighborhoods that I'm involved in, Malvern and Bathurst Finch, both neighborhoods has chosen food security as their big issue of focus for the Our Strong Neighborhood initiative funded by United Way. Food security done locally relates to climate resilience and can be a massive benefit for communities when there are climate emergencies like ice storms and floods. So this is just one example of an area of collaboration. I appreciate this opportunity to present my perspective and suggestions on the 2020 city budget, and I look forward to collaborate with the city further. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your deputation, Victoria. Do we have any questions? Okay. I have one very quickly. The Danforth study, you mentioned bike lane, cycling infrastructure on Danforth as something that we should be moving forward in 2020. The study that's taking place right now is currently contemplating exploring a pilot opportunity as part of the study process. Would you like to see a piloted bike lane on Danforth in 2020?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Very good. Okay, thanks for the clarification. Thanks for your deputation tonight. It's wonderful to hear from you.
Thank you.
Okay, up next we have Aleem Nathu, followed by Ibrahim Kahind and Catherine Tate. Hi, Aleem. Thanks very much for...
Aloha, hello.
Hi, thanks very much for joining us tonight. The microphone is on.
Thank you.
Yep, and we're going to put you on the clock, 5 minutes, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome stuff. Well, hi, my name is Aleem Nathu, and I will be speaking in regards to the Fair Pass program. The thing is that I've noticed with the City of Toronto and the Toronto Transit Commission here, I just wanted to mention that it seems as though that even though they do have what we call like a Fair Pass program, but it's only for people who are on OW or ODSP, what I'm proposing is an income-based Fair Pass program designed to help low-income people. And I'm going to give some examples of cities that have done this, that have been pretty successful. So as you can see up here, one is Sarnia Transit Service. I've lived in Sarnia, Windsor, London, Kitchener, and now Toronto. So Sarnia Transit Service has a low-income pass of $55 a month, and that one is run by the Inn of the Good Shepherd. And they also have tickets as well, where they have like 16 for 10 or 32 for 20. As well, they have student passes and a summer savings pass and a seniors pass. However, since I only have 5 minutes, I can't talk all day, even though I'm a very blunt speaker and I tell it like it is. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is with London Transit, they have a low-income pass program, which is for $95, and it's, well, $95 for the regular pass, but $61 is for the discounted one as we speak. If I'm going too fast, just let me know. And then the Transit Windsor service has a affordable pass program, also known as APP, which is $48.40. Normally, it's $95.70 for a regular pass. However, they also have what we call half-off bus passes as well. In fact, I just want to mention that they also have what we call $47.85 for a 15-day pass as well, as we speak on that. And they also have what we call student passes as well. But anyhow, without further ado here, I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to talk about Grand River Transit and how their passes operate as well. So as for starters, they have one for $75 in that case, while I think that Toronto should also have one as well. I also just want to mention a couple of things here as well. And I would appreciate your undivided attention. So I know with Guelph, they have a reduced pass program as well, but theirs is at $37.50. Theirs is one of the lowest I've seen so far in southwestern Ontario for an adult. But they also have what we call low-income passes for youth and seniors as well, as you can state up here. While with the TTC, they only have what we call a fare pass for $119.40, which I think is totally ludicrous, because the cost of living in Toronto has gone so high to the point that I feel as though that our politicians are pretty much ignoring this on deaf ears, but it's nice to see that we have 3 city councilors that are willing to listen about this. So I'll continue. Now, in this case here, with the Fare Pass program that the Toronto Transit Commission has, is that one has to receive Ontario Works. I copy this exactly from the TTC website, or they have to be on ODSP, or receive a child care fee subsidy. You're adding more work to the average Torontonian that wants relief in terms of their bus pass fares. It's so ridiculous how much bureaucracy there is with the TTC as well as the City of Toronto. And I wanted to address this as well, just to make it more, just to point it out to everyone here, as well as to how much bureaucracy there is. However, I also just want to mention as well that I noticed that TTC is looking to hire 50 additional fare enforcement officers. And to be quite honest with you, I think some of the money that would be saved, which I did my calculations, would be between $23 and $46 million a year from having these 50 fare enforcement officers. And I did all the calculations of the wages per hour, and I multiplied it from 32 to 48 hours a week. And from what I see here is the average salary is $46,202.88 to $86,653.44. And that comes up to, when I times this for all 50 people, it's like $23,101,440 to $43,326,720, which is $23 to $43 million annually that we are wasting to hire these 50 additional fare enforcement officers, when the equivalent of, I hope my facts are right, but this is to the best of my knowledge, 151,765 low-income residents could have access to free transit to 28,373, depending on how much money was generated on that, that we could save.
Aleem, could I just ask you for your final thought? And then we'll probably have some questions.
Okay, perfect. So my final thought of what I was saying is that there needs to be what we call a fair pass, which is 50% off for low-income people. That is the goal, because Mississauga has that and Hamilton has that as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
the deputation. I think we have some questions for you. Councillor Carroll.
I noticed that what you show us is the current Fair Pass details. Are you familiar with what's proposed in this budget, though?
Can you share that with the entire public, please? Because I mean, I don't think I read that.
Okay.
And
So
I'm
what-
sorry about the
this
ill
year
knowledge
we
of that.
moved- Yeah, so this year what it says it's tricky, and it's not meant to confuse people. It's simply, you have to put the budget where the money's coming from. And the money for the low fare pass doesn't come from the TTC budget, it comes out of social development's budget. But this year we moved to phase 3, which means an additional 370,000 people will be qualified for it beyond the conditions you show, twice what you're recommending there, because we're going to move to anyone who is at the low income measure plus 15%. Is now going to be eligible for it. Our biggest challenge in that is going to be not funding that, but making sure that everyone knows about that. Because by moving to that, we kind of strip away all of those separate little conditions and just get at, okay, submit here online, we're going to look at your case, and very quickly hand them out. So that 300 out of 3 million people in the population, there's all the OW recipients, ODSP, and the 370,000 who fit into that LIM plus 15. It's about 500,000 people out of 3 million people.
Because when I lived in the city of Windsor, I know for a fact that it took about 3 weeks for the application to be approved. How long will the application take for people who are on low incomes?
Well, that is what I think I can speak for a number of councillors, and particularly is it just worked out this year that the budget subcommittee for this round of consultations, we're all commissioners.
Yeah.
Councillor Bradford, Councillor Carroll, Councillor McCaffrey, we're all TTC commissioners. And so that's going to be, as board of directors, that's going to be the pressure we bring to bear on staff. Great to offer it. The city has given you the funds. Now, how fast can you get them on stream, and how far and wide can you communicate that this is available? That's the work that both our own city division and transit are going to do. But if you were not aware of it, I think you've already
I'm sorry if I
demonstrated-
wasn't,
Yeah.
because it was
but
a
you-
last minute thing.
But what you're doing is demonstrating we have a long way to go to communicate that. Yeah, am I right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do it with that. That will be question number 1 when we get to Toronto Transit Commission next week.
All right,
How are you going to
perfect.
communicate it? Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other further questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aleem. I would just ask if you're interested submitting the notes there to clerks. I'd be happy to take a look at that, particularly the stuff from other jurisdictions, if you're able to do that. Thanks for your deputation and coming down tonight. I'd like to invite Aleem Nathu to come down. Ibrahim Kahind. Ibrahim. Hi, Ibrahim. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
You'll have 5 minutes, and I'll turn the podium over to you.
Oh, thank you. My name is Ibrahim Obalola. I would like to make a deputation on social inclusion. Social inclusion is the process of improving the terms on which individuals and groups take part in society, improving the ability, opportunity, and dignity of those disadvantaged based on their identity.
Sorry, Ibrahim, could you just go back a couple seconds? I think we're having a hard time just hearing you.
Okay,
I just paused your time.
all right.
Go ahead.
There is a moral imperative to address social exclusion or marginalization in quote. If left If left unaddressed, the exclusion of disadvantaged groups can also be costly, and the costs, whether social, political, or economic, are likely to be substantial. The social and economic impact in terms of social interaction and community capacity building that leads to infrastructure development. It would impact politics by way of less participation in the political process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your deputation. Just see if there's any questions from committee here. Okay, thanks very much for coming down tonight, speaking with us. Thank you. I would like to call Catherine Tate to the podium, followed by Caroline Nardes and Vincent Rochacon. Is Catherine here? Okay. Caroline? Hi, Caroline. Thanks for joining us tonight. You'll have 5 minutes and then an opportunity for committee to ask you questions.
So my name is Carolina Nardes, and I work as nutrition coordinator with Samantha Geek as volunteer at San Bonaventure Catholic School. And we effectively administer and operate nutrition program at the school, providing health food to students. Our objective is to ensure that students have a nutrition meal, adequate and nutrition food during the school year. With the nutrition programs, we are able to provide proper nutrition meals for students so they can get nutrients and energy they need for the whole day to be able to learn. Following the nutrition guidelines, of course, and health and safety, research, knowledge about funding, and application, finance, and report. So we participate of workshops which give us knowledge to be able to run the program as well. Our type of program, we chose morning meal, and then we make sure at least 3 items are in the bin, which are for our school program are grains, dairy, and fruits and veggies. We also can add proteins to the bin. Our menu consists in very healthy food, fresh and whole grain, respecting children's allergy and individuality and culture. It will vary, the menu will vary according with the week and with the food we have in stock, so we don't get to food waste, right? And we respect children's culture, so we can bring different kinds of food, like, for example, samosas. We also respect different days, like holidays, Christmas Day, Easter, Halloween, so we can bring different kinds of food, different kinds of food that they never tried before, different fruits. We can make a sandwich day, omelette day. We can make a welcome back to school day, and with those days, we can bring different items. We are always looking forward to bring new items. We also freeze yogurt tubes, and we give them frozen because this is what the students request us, so we also respect the students' opinion. We are a big school, so we are serving 585 students per day. And this number, if you think about the month, like 25 days, it will result in 14,625 meals served. This program is universal, so it's offered for all students regardless of ability to contribute financially, respect religious restrictions, and works to accommodate allergies. The programs receive funding from the city and the provincial of Ontario, although this income is not sufficient for the whole year. So for that reason, we also need contribution or support from the community. We also considering some government cuts, so we are concerned and uncertain about the funding. Our program is a success so far in our school. We have very positive feedback from our staff, parents, and children. And we can clearly see the development of the program considering students' alimentary habits. I have had successful experience also in Brazil when I was a teacher. In Brazil, they run a program which is based on government funding. They have a special kitchen with special staff. They follow nutritionist guidelines for their menu, and they get funding for 4 meals per day in the kindergarten, which include morning meal, lunch, snack in the afternoon, and dinner. And for schools in Brazil, they get morning meal and lunch. This is respecting like all government schools and looking forward to give the students nutrition food and also helping the poor community.
Could I ask for your final thought there, Caroline?
Yes. So, 1 second. I always like to share the good experiences, so I'm here for that reason. And I'm so thankful I can also experience this nutrition program here in Canada. And for that reason, I would like to thank the city and the province of Ontario for their financial contribution, also for giving me this opportunity to be here sharing with all of you. Okay,
Well, thanks
thank
very
you.
much for the deputation, Caroline. Do we have any questions? Okay, I think we're good. Thanks again for coming down tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're on our last speaker, so if there's anyone who hasn't registered, this will be our last speaker this evening, and that's Vincent Rajacone. I apologize, Vincent. But yes, thanks for joining us here tonight.
Thank you so much,
So
Councillor.
you'll have 5 minutes, and then the committee can ask questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Councillor, dear committee members and citizens, fellow citizens, for being here and also taking the time to be here and also to give me a chance to speak. So my name is Vincent. I'm a chartered accountant and chartered professional accountant. I'm also the owner of a company called Compass Investment. So we invest mostly into food manufacturing business and transport, cosmetic, medical, and also retail stores. And we also have another branch that we invest into real estate. And so we own around 15 rental properties throughout Ontario and also in the core city of Toronto. This morning I was just sitting, and thank you for taking the time, Councillor, to speak about property in East York. Now, when we came to Canada, and I remember many years ago, 25 years ago, I remember that we really struggled. Like things was not always fine, and things was not always easy. And the biggest struggle was to pay the rent. And so we were renting, we were a big family, and we were in a small 2-bedroom. Now, things change a lot. I have the chance to own, but at the meantime, I see my fellow citizens have the same problem. And the problem just keeps growing. With time, and as a mission for a company, for the real estate part, we decided to give affordable housing. So we work with CODA, ODSP, and Ontario Works Citizens. And mostly what we do, it's we discount our rent by 30 to 50% of market value, and we give to them. Toronto is such a beautiful city. In fact, in 2018, we rank as the 7th most livable city, a tie with Tokyo, Japan. I really love Toronto. And also, by reading the budget, I saw that our vision is to have a quality of life, a better quality of life for the citizen. And as we know, Toronto is in the center of a housing crisis right now, economy 101. There's a short supply, high demand, so automatically the price goes up. And with a population in the great GTA of 6 million people, and more immigrants coming in the city, the issue will be just keep growing. Now, as I say, also the people are suffering, and the average salary is around $19 to $20 per hour. So that makes $3,200 gross, taking off an average rental of $2,300 minus the taxes, of course, on the gross at the very beginning. You are very lucky if you are left over with $300. Then you have to pay your public transport, your food, and maybe have a little bit of fun, which I doubt. So I really want to focus on affordable housing, affordable places, rental to live. And I really believe it's very important for a fellow citizen. So because of this, a lot of people are pushing outside the city now. So they're going outside Brampton, and they're trying to come inside to work, and they commute for more than an hour, which is very sad. And they spend most of the time in the public transport. Last year, when the City House Now initiative was created, 3,700 affordable houses was created. That's amazing, but the problem is 181,000 people was on the list, on the waiting list. And on the budget itself, it says that when you take property tax, and the average property tax is $3,141, $172 only goes toward is reinvested into the Toronto Community Housing Subsidy, and $171 goes on shelter and support housing program, which is only 10.9% of the budget balancing on property tax income. Now, on the budget, you also have, I see that my time is running, so I'm just going to go to the conclusion. I would like to suggest a few things. Maybe one of the things, according to Section 37, on the building permits and zoning, and to get zoning certificate, let's make it a little bit more easier. You have a program for the laneway housing, and I myself applied for one or two properties, and I saw that it's really a marathon, and also it's very hard to get hard to get to the approbation. Now, the second thing is, I know that you guys are working on a garden house called also the coach houses. Let's work in a way that it's much easier to get approval. Now, on zoning, Montreal have an amazing zoning, which is allowing a lot of properties to be duplex, fourplex, triplex, and which is actually a two-in-one. Affordable housing, but in the meantime, in a small lot, we can have more people living there. And last, it's really have some kind of incentive for landlords who are willing to cut the rent by 30 to 50%. And if you can do something on property tax or some kind of initiative, that would be a good thing. So I see that I just went over my time, so.
Great. Thanks very much for your deputation, Vincent. Any questions? I will just ask very quickly, are you aware of the study and the report that we have coming back on the missing middle and the yellow belt to Planning and Housing Committee?
No, I'm not aware of the
number
study.
of the things that you're talking about with the zoning bylaw and the deemed yellow belt. This is looking at adding some gentle density into those neighborhoods and exactly the housing typologies that you're talking about, duplexes, triplexes, quads, apartment buildings, as it relates to our zoning. That's something that we've asked staff to take a look at and explore new opportunities across the city, particularly outside of the downtown core where much of that is permitted. So that'll be coming back and something to keep your eye on.
I will surely keep
Okay,
in mind.
thanks
Thank
very
you
much
so
for joining us tonight.
Thank you again.
Okay, I think we do have one more debutant. The closer for the evening, John Paul Morgan. Thank you very much for joining us. It's great to have you here, and you will have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much.
We'll turn it over to you.
Actually, I think I'll put those up in a moment. So first of all, thanks Councillors Bradford, McKelvey, and Carroll for your work on the city's budget this year and for holding these public deputations today. So I'm here as a concerned citizen to essentially beg for more investment to mitigate climate change. I'm pleased to see that there is enhanced spending in this year's budget and new positions in terms of personnel opening up in the Energy and Environment Division being funded in the budget, but it's not enough. The Transform TO Climate Action for Healthy, Equitable, and Prosperous Toronto report issued by the city says that the city is going to need to invest around $60 billion between 2017 and 2050 to achieve the climate targets that are set out in Transform TO. And that works out to roughly $2 billion a year, whereas in the current budget, it appears that we're investing on capital roughly $15 million a year. So we're obviously well below the levels that will need to be on average between now and when we complete this transition to hit the targets that the city has universally adopted. Council adopted Transform TO unanimously in my recollection. So one thing to point out without going into detail, obviously, is that a lot of these investments, these massive investments in public transit and in electrification are going to save money over the long term by saving energy, by making Toronto a more efficient place to live and do business. So while $60 billion represents a massive investment, these are investments that are going to make our city better, and a lot of these investments are going to save money according to the city's modeling. So to put the funding in the perspective of one program that the city runs, the Home Energy Loan Program, that offers up to $75,000 to homeowners to improve and reduce the carbon of their homes. I'm pursuing this for my home to try to zero out the carbon that I produce. And at the current funding levels, HELP could do around 200 homes a year. And obviously that's not going to be enough to transition Toronto to a zero carbon city by 2050. $2 billion is 26,000 homes a year. Now, obviously, HELP's not the only program, but it's emblematic of the kind of thing you could do if this was invested properly. So I want to show you a graph. These are emissions pathways. So the darkest line is the historical emissions that the world has created. And then the future lines, or the paler lines, are the different curves that we would need to follow in order to maintain the world at a below 1.5 degree level, or essentially the sort of Paris climate commitments. So the longer we wait to start reducing those greenhouse gas emissions, the steeper the reduction has to be to have any hope. And as you can see, if we wait around 12 years, we essentially have to reduce to zero over the span of 1 year, which is patently impossible to have any hope. So the pathway that is highlighted with the little notation there is the least painful pathway, but it's the one that involves starting funding this all most urgently. Now, I'm obviously aware that this is too far in the budget process at this moment to divert such a massive sum of money, but I'm also aware that there's a mid-year adjustment that goes on, and that planning for next year's budget is going to essentially commence immediately upon completion of this year's budget. And so if the city has any hope of hitting the commitments that it's already made to itself and to its citizens under Transform TO, the rate of funding has to increase exponentially to that $2 billion level very quickly. And a lot of these investments are just going to make Toronto a better place and save the city money in the long term. So thank you very much. And I've dropped off these written deputations as well.
Wonderful. I think we have a question for you. I'll turn it over to Councilor Carroll.
I was going to ask you if we could have that graph, so that's that out of the way. I don't know if you were here earlier, one of the earliest deputation, well, actually, it was the tail end of the day sessions. But you know, talking about delaying and having to fund it now, but you went at doing all these things provides financial return. And one of the suggestions earlier was there needs to be a Transform TO person in every department. If there was a strong showing of Transform TO staff in economic development and Toronto Employment and Social Services, they'd be saying there's a ton of capital work coming your way. Are we training? Does the capital market have the ability to do this work? Are we training? In economic development, they'd be saying, put more money in Transform TO this year, because greening is job creation, and that's what we're supposed to do. Is that a thing that you espouse as well? Put a Transform TO person in every department and drive this thing?
I really appreciate the question, Councillor. I think that the city also committed this year to viewing everything. I believe it was everything through a climate lens. And I think that I know that this city's budget was not viewed through a climate lens because city staff, frankly, took that direction from council, but it needs to completely transform how it operates to view everything through a climate lens.
To be fair to them, they had already, most divisions had submitted their earliest draft as we were voting on that. So they'd really already drawn up the bulk of it. But what you're asking is that starting right now, they get ready for the 2021, what's my piece in this?
Exactly. And how does climate factor into every single decision, which slows down the rate of decision making because you have to pause and go, well, can we advance with that status quo decision, or do we have to consider a better way of doing it? And the thing about mitigating climate change today in city building is it does not mean accepting an inferior city or a worse place to live or a worse quality of life or even a more expensive life. I think that it is really a decision to deviate from the status quo and to force contractors and people to move outside their comfort zone and, by various means, get off of all the greenhouse gases that we're emitting, mainly, natural gas for heating. Like at the end of the day, we talk about a lot of things, but it's get people out of cars or into electric cars and get rid of natural gas for heating and switch to electric heating.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for the deputation, John. Appreciate it. Okay, so I think that's all our deputants for tonight. So with that, I'd like to move that the Budget Subcommittee for Scarborough and North York Civic Center consultations receive for information the public presentations and the communications submitted by the members of the public. The 6 p.m. meeting is now adjourned. I'd like to thank staff for being here. Oh, we need to vote on the motion. All in favor? Unanimous. So we are now adjourned. I'd like to thank staff for being here tonight and all of their assistance, and most importantly, the public for coming out and sharing your feedback. That means a lot to us. Very grateful. Thank you. Safe trip home.